Join us at Women of Courage and celebrate the achievements of women. The month of March is Women's History Month in the United States. During the month, the lives of women are extolled. Normally, I write a short essay on the lives of black women and discuss them on my show. This year, I am no longer enthusiastic. I am torn. I think my essays are being taken as entertainment. The experiences of these women are too valuable to be taken as entertainment. These women suffered and worked tirelessly to achieve success. I want my efforts to change lives. I want women to see, and I want men to see, possibilities. I want black girls and black women to say to themselves, I can do the same thing. I do not have to live the life I am living. I can change my life for the better. I want my essays to be instruments of change. But if the only time people read about the lives of black women is during the month of March, what does it matter? That is the same with breast cancer. Do women actually only pay attention to breast cancer during the month of October? I have a host of black women to discuss on my show. One in particular, and I truly do not want her life trivialized as entertainment. History has ignored her, the same as the women who helped Rosa Parks. This was a valiant woman. She fought in the trenches. It seems we tend to isolate certain people as heroes and everyone else fades into the obscurity. There were hundreds of women who supported Rosa Parks before she was even heard of. And there was a young woman who did the same thing and nobody remembers her name. There were hundreds of women on the front lines in Birmingham before Martin Luther King. The struggle in Birmingham was taken over by black men because they did not want it to seem that women were leading the struggle. When it became time for people to meet the dignitaries in Washington, D.C. after the march in Washington, black men excluded black women from these functions. Read your history. Black preachers grin and have women standing in the hot sun, cooking chicken and ribs to sell to support the church. But when it comes to running of the church, they call on the deacons. Black women are then supposed to sit down and shut up. The woman I plan to write and talk about extensively is Fannie Lou Hamer of Mississippi. She fought a relentless battle against the hateful people of Mississippi so blacks could vote. I served 2 years in Mississippi. The racism there was virulent. I was in Mississippi when SNCC came to town. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the many black women sterilized in Mississippi by white doctors in the state's denigrification plan. Remember, after the Civil War, Mississippi had one of the largest black populations in the country. So the black population in Mississippi needed to be reduced to allow the white man to maintain control. Imagine how she felt when she spoke of the children she was trying to pave the way for so they could vote. She would have no children of her own to benefit from her efforts. Yes, she knew Malcolm X, and yes, she knew Martin Luther King Jr., but most of all, she knew the people she were fighting for. You have to listen to her. I grew up around proud, uneducated black women like Fannie Lou Hamer. She knew how to clean an icebox. She knew how to shovel coal and start a fire in the winter. If you want to know something about a black woman, look at her hands. Watch her clean her house. Look under her bed, behind the kitchen stove and the toilet. Watch her fry chicken. Count the number of children she has and then look at their skin. Note the number of books in her home. Fannie Lou Hamer knew about boiling water to take a bath. She was one of 20 children. She was an orator, yet she dropped out of school at the age of 12. She began working as a sharecropper with her parents at the age of 6. She continued sharecropping after her marriage to Perry Hamer in 1942. She had the courage to stand up in front of thousands to tell them what was on her mind, to instill hope in their hearts, and to sacrifice for them. She once said, "Until I am free, you are not free either." You have to listen to her. There's a harmony in her spirit. Yes, she was tough and fiery, but she had resolve that would be hers for the rest of her life. She knew she would die fighting. She knew she would never relent. What makes me so angry is that we lost this woman at the age of 59 to breast cancer, the #1 killer of black women, second to murder. During this show, I'm going to play certain speeches that Fannie Lou Hamer gave to the public.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord.
And to the Credentials Committee. My name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stinney. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, "Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I mean that, said if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi." And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rooseville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. And 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who had used the washroom got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from the car that the fire workers was in and said, "Get that one there." And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. I was placed in a cell with a young woman called Miss Vesta Simpson. After I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, "Can you say yes, sir, nigger? Can you say yes, sir?" And they would say other horrible names. She would say, "Yes, I can say yes, sir." So, "Well, say it." She said, "I don't know you well enough." They beat her I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman. And he asked me where I was from. And I told him Rooseville. He said, "We are going to check this." And they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You are from Rooseville, all right," and he used a curse word. And he said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. And I laid on my face. The first Negro began to beat. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. I was holding my hands behind me at that time on the left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro had beat to sit on my feet, to keep me from working my feet. I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high. He walked over and pulled my dress. I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America. Thank you.
Women have the vote, at least on paper.
The amendment passes and it's ratified. It doesn't mean that Black women, yay, we can vote. No, now you're under the same restrictions that Black men were under after the Reconstruction period.
It's an incomplete victory.
Native Americans have to wait 4 more years to even be considered citizens. Chinese immigrants won't achieve full rights until the 1940s.
People want to prohibit people from having free and unencumbered access because that means that power and resources will then be redistributed. And then who will that favor? And so there's this fear that's behind all of this.
In the segregated South, an organized effort keeps Black citizens from the ballot box.
Residency requirements, poll taxes, literacy requirements.
The very real threat of violence, of lynching, were visited upon communities who did try to exercise the right to vote, which was why there are vast communities where people didn't even attempt to try to vote.
One woman brings the struggle to the national stage. Fannie Lou Hamer was born the last of 20 children to a family of Mississippi sharecroppers.
Growing up in the Mississippi Delta, she thinks, well, voting could help change my economic circumstances, and so I am going to try and go and register to vote.
She isn't allowed to register. Just for attempting it, she is fired from her job of 18 years and put out of her home. But she persists, becoming a voter and an activist.
The bus that she's in gets stopped, and all of the people who are with her who are trying to register to vote, they are removed from the bus.
Once again, women asking for their democratic rights are thrown in jail.
3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was State Highway Patrol. He said, we're going to make you wish you was dead.
She is physically assaulted to the point that that assault has lifelong effects on her.
This time, there is no public outcry. President Johnson pays no attention. But Hamer does not back down. Instead, she launches a campaign for the U.S. Senate. Though the longest of long shots in a district where only 5% of African Americans are registered to vote, she uses the platform to raise her voice.
We are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
In 1964, Hamer speaks at the National Democratic Party convention in Atlantic City.
We want to register, to become first-class citizens. And if the freedom...
She told the story of what was happening to Black people in their quest for their natural-born right to vote.
It's this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America.
She used her platform to tell a story that I don't think many people in the nation knew.
She recognized that if the South was going to change, it was going to change at the hands of people like her.
1 year later, Congress passes a law to enforce the 19th and 15th Amendments, the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
As much as we want the story of voting rights, not just for women, but for everyone in the United States, to be a forward trajectory, there are always new barriers that people find ways to put up.
I'm thinking about in terms of a better and a greater world for all people. And we can't do that by me in one corner doing what I can do to hurt you and you in the other corner doing the same thing against me. I'm not concerned about just representing black people because we have poor white that's in the same category with the poor Negro. Well, I want to see a change for the people. And if we can get a good white man, all right, we'll put him in office. But I don't want it all black and I don't want it all white. I've never thought in terms of violence, of all the things that have been gained by people fighting and going through blood for it. They don't have anything, you know. This, to me, it doesn't make sense. If I hate you because you hate me, I'm no better than you are. And all we want to do is to make these people understand that we are human beings and we can work together in this country, and to have a democracy, that's what we're going to have to do. Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. That then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Roosevelt, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. and two of the people to use the restaurant. Two of the people wanted to use the washroom. The four people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who had used the washroom got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from the car that the fire workers was in and said, "Get that one there." And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. I was placed in a cell with a young woman called Miss Vesta Simpson. After I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, "Can you say yes, sir, nigger? Can you say yes, sir?" And they would say other horrible names. She would say, "Yes, I can say yes, sir." So, "Well, say it." She said, "I don't know you well enough." They beat her I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman, and he asked me where I was from. And I told him Roosevelt. He said, "We're going to check this." And they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You are from Roosevelt, all right," and he used a curse word. And he said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. And I laid on my face. The first Negro began to beat. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. I was holding my hands behind me at that time on my left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro had beat to sit on my feet, to keep me from working my feet. I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high. He walked over and pulled my dress. I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
I am going to pause for a second to take a short break while you listen to information regarding willpower and encouragement. It is all a matter of learning new behaviors. And please remember, it is easier to build strong minds than to repair injured people. What I said is a modification of a quote by Frederick Douglass. He said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Now for my break.
Fannie Lou Hamer was a force to be reckoned with, enduring intractable racism, police beatings, and even forced sterilization. She never stopped working for equal voting rights for all. This is the tragic real-life story of Fannie Lou Hamer. Born on October 6, 1917 in Montgomery County, Mississippi, Fannie Lou was the 20th and youngest child of Lou Ella and James Townsend. Both Lou Ella and James worked as sharecroppers their entire lives. When Fannie Lou was just 6 years old, she joined them despite having endured a bout of polio just a year earlier. Hamer was 8 years old in 1925 when she saw Joe Pullum, a local sharecropper, lynched. In an interview with Jack Odell in 1965, she said, "I remember that until this day, and I won't forget it." Poverty forced Hamer to drop out of school at the age of 12, and by the age of 13, she was picking as much as 400 pounds of cotton in a day and receiving $1 for her work. Since Hamer had learned how to read and write during her brief time in school, she also worked as a record keeper on the plantation, and soon discovered just how the owners would cook the books to cheat the poor sharecroppers out of their fair wages. To offset this, Hamer began secretly tilting the scales to ensure people weren't cheated. She later recalled, "I didn't know what to do, and all I could do was rebel in the only way I could rebel." In 1944, Fannie Lou married Perry Pap Hamer, a tractor driver on a local plantation. 17 years later, in 1961, she underwent surgery to remove a small cyst in her stomach. When she woke, she discovered that she'd also been given a hysterectomy without her consent. According to PBS, this type of forced sterilization was so common at the time that it became referred to as a Mississippi appendectomy, a term coined by Hamer herself. On June 8, 1964, Hamer testified before a panel in Washington, D.C. that at the North Sunflower County Hospital, 6 out of the 10 Negro women that go to the hospital are sterilized with the tubes tied. Forced sterilizations have a dark history and an equally dark present in the United States. Indiana passed the first forced sterilization law in 1907, and while they hit their peak in the 1930s and 1940s, targeting those deemed to be criminals or unfit by the 1950s, sterilization laws started targeting welfare recipients as well. Forced sterilizations were frequently racially motivated. This became abundantly clear when Mississippi proposed a bill that would make it a felony for a parent on welfare to have more than one child. Jail time could be avoided if the parent consented to sterilization. Ultimately, sterilization was removed from that bill, but untold women like Hamer still were sterilized without their consent. On August 31, 1962, Hamer and 17 others went to the courthouse in Indianola, Mississippi to register to vote. According to PBS, most of the group was blocked from even attempting to register. Only Hamer and one other man were allowed to fill out an application and take a literacy test. At the time, literacy tests were purposefully designed to keep Black people from voting, and when Hamer was asked to explain de facto laws, she later recalled that, "I knowed as much about a facto law as a horse knows about Christmas Day." After failing the literacy test, the group was denied the right to register to vote. On the way home, their bus was stopped by police and fined $100 for being too yellow. Then the persecution got worse. The owner of the plantation where Hamer worked and lived demanded that she withdraw her application to vote.
Mr. Marlowe told me that I would have to go down and withdraw my registration or leave because they wasn't ready for that in Mississippi.
Hamer refused and was immediately thrown off the plantation where she had lived and worked for 18 years. She temporarily stayed with a friend before finding a new home, and just narrowly missed being murdered by those who were trying to suppress the Black vote.
They shot in the house 15 times thinking that I was there.
On January 10, 1963, Hamer was finally able to pass the literacy test. According to The Nation, after her second attempt on December 4th, she told the registrar, quote, "You'll see me every 30 days till I pass." A month later, she passed. But despite now being registered to vote, she discovered that she still wasn't allowed to vote because she didn't have any poll tax receipts. In some parts of the United States, people were required to pay a tax in order to vote. A tax put in place to ensure that the poorest people, who were often people of color, didn't get a voice in the government. And they weren't subtle about this fact either. For instance, in 1939, Alabama's Tuscaloosa News published an editorial that read in part, "This newspaper believes in white supremacy, and it believes that the poll tax is one of the essentials for the preservation of white supremacy." In 1962, the United States passed the 24th Amendment, which outlawed poll taxes for federal elections. Despite this, Hamer was still denied the right to vote a year later because it wasn't really enforced until 1965. And to this day, 8 states, including Mississippi, still haven't ratified the amendment. While Pap worked to pay off their sharecropping debt at the plantation, Hamer continued working toward voter registration and desegregation. On June 9, 1963, Hamer and 9 other activists were returning on a bus from a voter registration and civic education training session in Charleston, South Carolina. The activists had tried to integrate lunch counters at the various bus stations along their way home, and their protests had enraged their bus driver. According to Fannie Lou Hamer, America's Freedom-Fighting Woman by Megan Parker Brooks, the driver began using the phone at every stop, reporting their location to Mississippi police. In Winona, Mississippi, police arrested at least 6 of the activists, even those who'd remain on the bus, and took them to jail. Hamer and her fellow activists weren't released from jail until June 12th. And in those 3 days, Hamer sustained such severe and prolonged beatings that she suffered from lifelong damage to her kidneys, eyes, and legs. In addition to beating the activists themselves, police also forced the other black people who were also imprisoned in the jail at the time to beat the activists as well. While there was later a brief trial, the police were cleared for their actions. After several failed attempts to work with the all-white pro-segregation Mississippi Democratic Party, Hamer co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and in 1964, she went to the Democratic National Convention in an attempt to get representation. As a result, she received death threats. When she reported them to the police, they told her, quote, "Don't look to us for help." On August 22, 1964, Hamer testified before the Credentials Committee at the Democratic National Convention. She started by stating her full name and home address, defiantly signaling her fearlessness to every white supremacist. According to the Washington Post, President Johnson was terrified that her testimony at the convention would break up the coalition of white Southern delegates he needed to get elected. He tried to convince her not to speak, but when she did anyway, he abruptly called a pointless live press conference so the TV broadcast would have to cut away from Hamer's testimony. It backfired, bringing more media attention to Hamer's testimony than it otherwise might have gotten, with many evening news programs giving full coverage of the speech that Johnson had interrupted.
Because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America.
As a result of pressure from President Johnson and vice presidential candidate Hubert Humphrey, the convention refused to accept Hamer as an official delegate. Instead, officials offered a farcical compromise to the MFDP. They'd be allowed 2 delegates, but they could neither sit in the Mississippi section, nor would they be able to cast votes. Oh, and neither one of those seats were allowed to go to Hamer. Why? According to Humphrey, the president has said he will not let that illiterate woman speak on the floor of the Democratic Convention. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party voted unanimously to reject the administration's compromise. In Hamer's words, quote, "We didn't come all this way for no 2 seats. They returned to Mississippi, shut out once again by a process meant to empower them." In 1964, Hamer also ran unsuccessfully for Congress. According to an interview with Jack Odell, Hamer recalled that it was harder for her to pass the literacy test in order to register to vote than it was for her to qualify to run for Congress. And despite being barred from the official ballot, the MFDP gave out freedom ballots that included candidates of all races. According to Smithsonian Magazine, after her first bid was unsuccessful, Hamer ran for office 2 more times in 1967 and 1971. Unfortunately, her 1967 run was disqualified on a technicality. and she lost to the incumbent in 1971. She did have one moment of triumph, though. In 1968, the Democratic Party began requiring equal representation for state delegations, and she finally was recognized as an official delegate from Mississippi at the National Democratic Party Convention. She used her platform to protest the ongoing war in Vietnam. Seeing that not much progress was being made on the political front, Fannie Lou Hamer turned most of her attention toward economic justice as a way to fight for racial equality. In 1969, Hamer founded the Freedom Farm Cooperative in order to provide black people with land that they could own and farm collectively. With the help of donors such as the Measure for Measure organization and Harry Belafonte, by 1970, the co-op had amassed 680 acres for cultivation. Membership for the co-op was $1 a month, and even though only 30 families could afford the dues, those who couldn't pay weren't excluded. Roughly an additional 1,500 families were also part of the Freedom Farm Cooperative in name. In 1970, the collective also started a pig bank for impoverished families. With help from the National Council of Negro Women, the collective purchased 5 male pigs and 35 female pigs, and over the next 3 years, thousands of pigs made their way to black families. Hamer especially loved the pig bank, stating that, quote, "I wouldn't take nothing for our golden pigs." Unfortunately, without institutional backing or resources, the Freedom Farm Collective only lasted a handful of years. But at its height, it was one of the largest employers in Sunflower County, Mississippi. According to the Center for Constitutional Rights, Hamer was actually partly responsible for the Voting Rights Act's passage thanks to her 1965 civil rights case, Hamer versus Campbell. Brought against the Circuit Clerk of Mississippi for restricting black people's right to register and vote, Hamer's victory in court even allowed the elections to be overturned due to their discriminatory practices. Even after the Voting Rights Act was finally passed in 1965, Fannie Lou Hamer continued to focus on equal voting rights. Despite the federal protections that the Voting Rights Act claimed to guarantee, though, white people in power continued to try to prevent black people from registering and voting. Still, she fought on. According to PBS, in 1970, Hamer organized plaintiffs for a class action lawsuit regarding school desegregation in Sunflower County. This suit resulted in the district court ordering the county to merge its segregated schools into a single public school system. Fannie Lou Hamer's health suffered during her final years. In 1976, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent a radical mastectomy. She continued her civil rights work as long as she could, but as her health worsened, fundraising and public speaking became more and more difficult. Hamer died on March 14, 1977. Her life cut tragically short at the age of 59. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects, but some regretted the media circus that transpired. According to Fannie Lou Hamer, The Life of a Civil Rights Icon by Ernest N. Bracey, some of her fellow activists believed that dignitaries looking for a photo op ended up overshadowing coverage of Hamer's life and work, and the mourning being done by her real friends, family, and neighbors. Hamer was buried at the Freedom Farm Cooperative, and her gravestone bears her famous motto,
"We are sick and tired of being sick and tired."
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.
This is the end of the series, Fannie Lou Hamer. She is the only black woman I will discuss this year. I hope you enjoyed learning about Fannie Lou Hamer. She lived a life of courage, a life of respect, and a life dedicated to changing and helping people. I greatly admire this woman. She is one of my heroes, and I was absolutely devastated when she died. She died of breast cancer at the age of 59. We must do something about this disease. It is claiming too many lives. This is why I am asking you to work with me. Call me at 734-786-3233 or email me at murderedvoices@gmail.com and ask what you can do to help. Work with me to stop black women dying of breast cancer. We have books on sale at WHPR, that's the radio station, where the proceeds will help us pay for the printing of the booklet Black Women and Breast Cancer. We want to give this booklet to every black woman living in Michigan. Call me and say you are willing to help. Thank you. Hi, I decided that at the end of every show for the next year, I would share excerpts from a book that I believe would enhance your life and make you a stronger thinker and problem solver. All characteristics that will help you win at life and raise stronger and healthy children. Many of you turn your nose up at reading, or you snub the advice that you must read in life to succeed, or you compare the cost of a book to getting a new pair of shoes or getting your hair done or your nails done. The reason why you make these cost comparisons is because you do not truly value a book. A book is a magnificent instrument that can change the course of your life and the lives of your children. In later shows, I plan to discuss with you how a book changed the lives of certain people. I understand that you do not earn a lot of money, and this money is valuable to you because of all the things you see advertised that you desire, and you do not want to spend a lot of money on a book. A new pair of shoes is more valuable to you than a book. If you truly cannot afford a book, then you need to go to the library and take your children with you for a day of reading. You must gird your loins and proceed at educating yourself. Some of you seem to think that having a conversation with your stupid girlfriend or your stupid boyfriend will help you more than reading a book, when actually having a conversation with your loudmouth girlfriend or loudmouth boyfriend is merely a cathartic, allowing you to blow off steam and proclaim how life has been so unfair to you. What you do not realize is that the advice coming from your do-nothing girlfriend or your do-nothing boyfriend is advice coming from a fool. Your do-nothing girlfriend is a sexual opportunist looking for a man she can impress with her body. When her vagina fails her, what will your girlfriend do but go to work at McDonald's or Wendy's at the age of 60 and continue to spread her ignorance at church? Her daughter will be on the street and her son in prison. She will never realize that her life is the result of the decision she made not to educate herself through reading. All her life she felt that she had something better to do than reading. She had something better to do than reading with her children. She had something better to do than working with her children. And that was going to the bar, trying to entertain a man, or trying to find some man that would buy her a pair of shoes. A man spending money on her was more important than educating herself. In later shows, I'm going to spend a great deal of time giving you some examples of fools. These are people who think they are smart, willing to trade their body and integrity for a dollar bill. These people end up in the cemetery after lamenting each and every day of their lives about their unfulfilled dreams. Do not be upset by the use of the word fool. You tell me if a woman is not a fool to instruct her grandson to kill her husband for a $25,000 life insurance. Let that sink in for a moment. Instead of instructing her grandson to make something of his life, the grandmother instructs her grandson to become a murderer, to kill his grandfather. I have this anecdotal advice for you about reading. Listen to this short true story. A friend and I were talking. She said a woman she knew called her and sought to renew their friendship. During their conversation, the woman told my friend that President Trump had done so much for black people, and that's why she voted for him in 2016, and she was going to vote for him again in the upcoming election. My friend asked her a question. She said, "Tell me some of the things that Trump has done for black people." The woman said, "A whole lot." My friend persisted and asked her to name one thing that Trump had done for black people. The woman could not. The woman kept using the phrase a whole lot of things. My friend said after a while she stopped talking. Finally, the conversation was over and my friend hung up. My friend said, as she hung up, she made up her mind right then that she would never renew her friendship with this woman. Now ask yourself why. Why would she not renew her friendship with this woman? You can answer this question in 2 words. The woman was a poor thinker. She never investigated anything that was told to her. Whether you know it or not, a person who is a poor thinker, who does not examine his or her thinking, is a very dangerous person indeed. Think about it.
Reasons to read You Are the Prophet of Your Life. 1. This book is not just for Christians. This book is good for people of all religions or even lacking religion. As said on the About page of the book, you don't have to believe in God to read scriptures. Reading the scriptures can help liberate you from negative thinking. In this book, we see how this is true and can learn to fight against this negative thinking ourselves. 2. This book is a great book for feminists. This book talks about the struggles of women put in hard situations. Although it is not recommended for survivors of violence, it is a great reminder of how the world can be to those of us who have been more privileged and lucky. This book shows us the lives of fellow women who've had it tough. It reminds us to be grateful for our fortune and reminds us how this world needs to change. Once we have that in our heads, all of us women can stand together and make the changes needed to better the lives of all women, hopefully forever. 3. This book helps us break away from negative thinking. Negative thinking is what keeps us away from our true potential. If we don't think we can do something, often we won't. The author of this book herself mentioned in her introduction that she almost didn't go through with writing the book because 3 men told her that no one would read it. If we instead believe in ourselves, we can reach our full potential. We can write that book or start that hobby. 4. This book reminds us to stick to our morals. No matter what you believe in something. Something or someone is right and the other is wrong. There are nuances, but you have created those nuances with your beliefs too. The author of this book is clear and strong beliefs and feelings when it comes to what one should and should not do. Even if we as readers do not agree with this, we can be inspired by her intensity. We can learn how to be as strong in our beliefs as well and stand up for the changes we want to happen. 5. This book helps us question the society we are a part of. This book points a critical finger and magnifying glass at our society. It shows us how men and women each fail in our lives and our society. We can see how the author is skeptical of our society, and we can become skeptical ourselves. This is not a bad thing. This keeps us from blindly following something that may or may not match our values and morals. 6. This book helps us take a deeper look into our emotions. You Are the Prophet of Your Life shows us how our emotions affect our actions and how these emotions can get in the way. If we are too loose with how we feel, we can make decisions we will later regret. However, if we are too strong, we can't let in love of anyone, including God. This book helps us check on our emotions by hearing the stories of others. 7. Reading itself is great. Reading is fun. It can also help us better our lives and increase our knowledge of many topics. 8. This book reminds us that we are to be judged by our actions and words. We are what we do and say. We are to be judged on that and not anything else. Just because we describe ourselves as a specific type of person like Christian or atheist, that doesn't make anyone better or worse than the other. The superiority comes from what you do with the life, time, and opportunities we are provided. 9. This book makes you feel. This book uses the second-person point of view of you. This keeps us in the headspace of those to who the author is writing. It makes you feel like the author is talking directly to you, reaching into your soul and letting you know right and wrong. 10. The book provides actual biblical quotes. Actual biblical quotes show you the more direct words of God, which can help religious individuals in their worship and personal relationship with God. It can also help us understand the reasoning behind the author's beliefs and gives her some more authority on each topic. As well, even if you are not religious, you can recognize the historical significance of the text and understand that they are coming from a place of hoping for a more moral world. You should visit touchedbythelight.us. Are you a woman seeking solace? Or are you a woman in need of the comfort of prayers? Or are you one distressed and disturbed? It doesn't matter your niche. The Prayer Jar is a book just for you. It deserves your study table. The author, a fellow woman, writes this book inspirationally to address your prayer needs in every situation. The book does not only bring you closer to God, but it also leads you to a mature prayerful life. The printing is in black and white. Don't wait. Go to https://touchedbythelight.us/regular-publications to get your copy instantly for $14.95 only. The Prayer Jar, a Christian book for your prayer life.
Join us at the Women of Courage show every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. and every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. for information that will change your life. You can also visit us at our website, touchedbythelight.us, for more information. Thank you. If you do not like your life, then change it. Listen to us when we broadcast, and we can help you find a new way.